200 years ago, the famous explorer Andrew Smith brought the first scientific expedition into the Magaliesberg, which was then the kingdom of Mzilikazi. And he found a wildlife paradise. He recorded the natural history of this region in several wonderful publications which have now become very famous. The following year, William Cornwallis Harris brought a hunting expedition into this region, and his publications and paintings further revealed the wealth of the fauna and flora of the area. And then there followed a train of 30 or 40 famous botanists and collectors and explorers throughout the 19th century, all drawn to the Magaliesberg by its natural abundance. One of the reasons for this abundant biodiversity is evident when you look at a map of the biomes that make up the South African natural landscape. The Magaliesberg lies right at the interface between the grassland biome of the central highveld and the bushveld savanna that stretches away to the north, and it draws species of plants and animals from both. The line of division is not precise, but gradually the grassland gives way to bushveld as one moves northwards across the ridges of the Biosphere Reserve. If you overlay the map of the Magaliesberg Biosphere with the Messina and Rutherford map of vegetation types, it's at once apparent that the veld types south of the Magaliesberg are shown as shades of green, indicating various types of grassland, while those on the north are shades of brown, indicating different types of savanna. Many plants and animals occur in both biomes, but some, like the well-known marula tree with its famous berries, is common on the north of the Magaliesberg and not on the south. South Africa's national bird, the blue crane, only occurs in the grassland on the south of the Magaliesberg, while the yellow-billed hornbill seldom comes south of the range. Springbok are arid grassland dwellers and occur naturally on the southwest, while impala are savanna dwellers to the northwest. Their ranges overlap in the Magaliesberg. And another reason why there is such diversity of fauna and flora is because the rugged terrain offers a mosaic of different habitats: rocky outcrops, mountain cliffs, rivers and wetlands, and grassy hills. They all provide specialized niches for different species. In this talk, we're going to traverse the Magaliesberg Biosphere region from south to north and discover some of the biodiversity found in the different habitats. The first stage of that journey crosses the grasslands on the south of the Biosphere Reserve. Grassland is one of the most threatened biomes in South Africa because urbanization and agriculture have transformed more than 60% of the natural grassland of the highveld. But in the Renosterspruit Conservancy and the Cradle of Humankind in the south of the biosphere, you can still hear the cry of jackals at night and the familiar cackle of guinea fowl. Secretary birds strut over the veld, and you could catch a glimpse of a shy steenbok, or a hedgehog shuffling about in the dark. The success of the highveld grassland biome is dependent on fire and frost, because the growing parts of grass are at or below ground level, and in the long dry winters when fires decimate the trees and shrubs, the grass quickly recovers and remains the dominant vegetation, along with a few specialized fire-resistant plants like the monkey-tail flower in the foreground. Some trees, like the keepersol or cabbage tree, are adapted to fire and they survive well in grassland. Its thick, corky bark protects the sensitive vascular system from getting burnt. Other trees can survive in grassland, where rocky outcrops, particularly in the dolomite areas, provide protection from frost and fire. The grass itself, although very obvious, accounts for less than half of the species diversity in grassland. Herbs like this cat's whiskers flourish in grassland, and the ink plant actually parasitizes grass. It bruises easily and the petals turn inky black, which gives it its name. Several species of Hypoxus, the potato plant, grow in grassland, and they have important traditional medical qualities. They are one of the first splashes of colour in spring. The rather silly named Doll's powder puff is a miniature wildflower that lurks under the grass cover, and at the same time the very showy flower of the tumbleweed plant emerges in early spring, the huge onion-like bulb having protected it all of winter. And once the flower blows away, the curious, beautiful fan of twisted leaves appears. Below the dolomitic grassland are of course the caves, famous for the hominid fossils found there. But they are also the home of bats, and during winter tens of thousands of Schreiber's long-fingered bats roost in the dolomitic caves, and then they migrate during summer to breed in the Southern Cape and in Limpopo. Our journey across the Biosphere Reserve now moves into the rough mountainous areas of the Skurveberg, and from there to the foot of the Magaliesberg itself. The landscape here becomes more rugged as we move north. The rocks are shaped into strange formations, with spectacular arches and overhangs. Fig trees spread themselves against the sheer cliffs, and the giant mountain aloes, Aloe marlothii, grow up to 3 meters tall, and they totally cover some of the hillsides. The rivers draining the Dolomite and Chert landscape provide a completely different habitat, as they cut magnificent gorges through the mountains. Most of them rise on the Witwatersrand and flow north towards the Magaliesberg. The Jukskei River, for example, begins in the streets of Johannesburg, and here we see it flowing past the monument commemorating the first gold strike in the old Transvaal Republic. Many of these north-flowing rivers flow through the Nosterspruit Conservancy, where they are augmented by streams arising from the underground aquifers in the Dolomite itself, and this makes this one of the gems of the Magaliesberg Biosphere. Ultimately, they all converge with the Crocodile River, slicing through high cliffs and pausing at tranquil pools shaded by the branches of massive bush willows, or passing through dense vegetation that offers sanctuary for the secretive clawless otter and the not-so-secretive vervet monkeys. Fish eagles patrol along the rivers. Darters hang themselves out to dry after fishing forays, and kingfishers give splashes of colour in the reeds. As the Crocodile River approaches the Magaliesberg from the south, its confluence with the Magalies River, flowing from the west, is now the Hartbeespoort Dam, and it presents a slightly different aquatic habitat. Sadly, all of the rivers flowing from urban areas are badly polluted, bringing contaminants and nutrients into the dam and causing algal blooms and eutrophication. Invasive water hyacinth flourishes under such conditions, and it can double its mass every fortnight, and it needs constant control. But despite these problems, Hartbeespoort Dam supports a wonderful bird life, and it's classified as an important bird area. Water birds such as jacanas, yellow-billed storks, and flamingos are just a few of the hundreds of waterfowl that can be seen in quiet reaches of the dam. The third stage of our crossing of the Biosphere Reserve takes us into totally different habitats in the Magaliesberg itself. The deep soils and rivers of the valleys have supported flourishing agricultural communities for thousands of years, and as we approach the Magaliesberg Ridge, the south-facing slopes are a mosaic of woodland and grassland, each a distinctly different habitat type. The grass on the mountain is less nutritious than the valleys, and veld fires burn hotter because the slope boosts the updraft. Despite this, Suikerbos proteas thrive in this grassland, and each flower is a miniature game reserve full of feeding insects. Buchenhout trees, Phoria saligna, are also fire survivors on the mountain slopes, and the common hookthorn, Senegalia caphra, is a pioneer species whose saplings are remarkably capable of rapid regrowth after being burnt to the ground. After the fires, the wildflowers that come up are spectacular. Many, like this Ruellia, don't even have a common English or Afrikaans name. One of the prettiest is Sphedamnocarpus, with its slightly crumpled petals, and in late summer it sprawls extravagantly across rocky outcrops. Various species of gladiolus flower in summer, their underground bulbs having escaped frost and fire, and high under the shadow of the cliffs is the rare Streptocarpus vandeluri, endemic to these ridges. But rarity is no protection against porcupines, who trundle over the mountain slopes, digging up roots, as do warthogs, which are more common in the Magaliesberg than many people realize. But the monarch of the grassy slopes is the eland, largest of the African antelopes and deeply embedded in the culture of the San people who once lived here. These days, eland are only found in protected reserves. Bird life in the grassland is prolific, but it's cryptically coloured, like Swainson's spurfowl and the ground scraper thrushes. Sunbirds, though, visit the wild dagga and aloes flowering in the grassland, and white-fronted bee-eaters hawk for insects overhead. At ground level, the smaller creatures like mountain tortoises and the almost harmless burrowing scorpions, and termites in air-conditioned termitaria, and a million other creatures make up the complexity of the Magaliesberg ecosystem. Interspersed with the grassland slopes on the southern face of the Magaliesberg are patches of woodland. This is not riverine forest, because the tilt of the quartzite drains water to the north and there are very few streams flowing southwards. But the deep soil of the south-facing aspect, away from the sun, allows the forests to develop. And this is the domain of leopards, and where ecologist John Power is doing valuable conservation work on their habits and their distribution. Here you can sometimes see kudu, and at dusk or early morning you may see galagos or night apes searching for acacia gum, or a genet on the prowl for easy pickings from human settlements. Many of the trees, like sagewood, bear scented flowers to attract pollinators. Or, like the Cape chestnut, they have showy floral displays above the canopy where they can best be seen by insects. Perhaps the most conspicuous are the blossoms of the wild pear, because they appear in early spring when everything else is still rather drab. The other early spring splash of colour comes not from a flowering tree, but from the leaves of a wild grape creeper, which retain their autumn colouring right through the winter until September. Like trees everywhere, the fruits of the forest trees are eaten and distributed by birds. Figs are especially favoured, and green pigeons are among the many birds that congregate in the fig trees during the fruiting season. Searching the trees for insects and spiders rather than fruit is this Bennett's woodpecker. And hedgehog spiders are well armed and camouflaged in defence. At night they hang with outstretched forelegs to catch passing moths. A more conspicuous woodland spider is the golden orbweb spider, whose webs festoon almost every pathway. Birds are difficult to see in woodland, but the parasitic Diederik cuckoo is easily heard as he persistently distracts other birds from their nests so that his mate can place her egg in foster care, while kukels skulk about the bushes hunting for fledglings, and the Natal spurfowl scratch in the leaf litter. A forest is not just a place, it's a living ecosystem, and nothing makes this clearer than the myriad fungi that are found there. Bracket fungus claws at the tough wood, and beefsteak fungus can fell a full-grown tree in a couple of years, while copper trumpets and coral fungus recycle the detritus into life-sustaining organic soil. Just a few meters from the gentle moisture of the forest is an environment that could not be more radically different, the stark harshness of the quartzite cliffs. But for some, the hostile environment is a benefit. After foraging all day abroad, baboons roost on the cliffs at night, safe from marauding leopards. Klipspringers leap about the precipitous rocks on specially adapted spongy hooves, and dussies live here in large colonies, relatively safe from most predators, and they even establish lavatory middens indicating their permanence. But they are still vulnerable to the powerful Barrow's eagles that hunt in pairs along the cliff face. However, it's the endangered Cape vultures for which the Magaliesberg is famous. They nest on the cliff face and are highly susceptible to disturbance, to declining food resources, and even poisoning by farmers. In a happier conservation state are mockingcliff chats and the little elephant shrews that scamper from the shade of one rock to another. Surprisingly, the arid, hostile world at the summit of the Magaliesberg is the source of life for other habitats. Stormwater gathers in clear pools and is retained in sponges, the biology of which is not fully known. From here it is gradually released throughout the year. From the crest, the landscape dips away to the north, tilted up to the full heat of the sun. In this rough and stony terrain, one of the most conspicuous trees is the stamvrucht, which bears delicious fruit along its stem if you can get to it before the baboons do. The beautiful but lethally poisonous cork bush has also adapted well to these harsh conditions. And the genetics of the extraordinary resurrection plant, with its ability to revive from extreme dormancy, is now being studied by medical science. In places, the rocks have weathered into strange shapes, and in the gravel debris below them, this little succulent, Frithia pulchra, has evolved a leaf structure that matches the gravel grains. It grows nowhere else in the world. And the Pegleri aloe is another Magaliesberg endemic that grows nowhere else. Rocky outcrops are where one also finds puff adders, and it's as well to tread carefully there. Every step down the mountain takes us deeper into the bushveld proper. Small herds of grey rhebok and mountain reedbuck are common. Brown hyena, once almost exclusively nocturnal, are now quite often seen during the day. And the other major predator on the northern slope is the caracal. With more and more game farms opening, the once rare sable antelope is now much more common, and many of the big game species that enthralled Cornwallis Harris 200 years ago are now being brought back into private and public game reserves. The presence of the lilac-breasted rollers is a sure sign that we're now in the bushveld savanna, and common bee-eaters, yellow-billed hornbills, and the stunningly colourful violet-backed starlings are typical bushveld birds to be seen on this side of the mountain. The last habitat we visit in this talk is scenically the most beautiful. Water from those sponges and wetlands at the summit cascade into deep kloofs, some with almost sheer rock walls, and others sloping more gently. All are well wooded with trees, thriving on the benign, warm but sheltered microclimate. Many reach giant proportions, reaching up to a closed canopy of Afro-temperate forest, which is actually a third biome. It's ecologically distinct from the grassland and savanna. On the forest floor one finds Scodoxus paintbrushes in rocky places, Aromatheca overhanging the streams, and the beautiful Rothmania bushes on shady banks. The rare carnivorous Drosera plant traps and consumes insects in marshy parts of the stream, and beautiful mosses and lichens decorate the rocks in the gorge. Woodland kingfishers are noisy and conspicuous, but most forest birds, like the white-throated robin-chat and the emerald-spotted wood dove and the grey-headed bushshrike, are more difficult to see in spite of their bright plumage. Lower downstream, where the kloof opens out into the valley, little bee-eaters can be seen, and the presence of other small creatures like yellow mongoose and the harmless striped scarpsteker and sprays of raisin bush are signs that the unique forest habitat is merging back into the savanna. In this talk, we have moved from one great African biome to another, and we have glimpsed at a third. We've visited 10 different habitat types in the Magaliesberg, and we've seen just a few of the many thousands of species that occur there. This incredible diversity of natural life occurs in a narrow strip just 40 kilometers wide of mountainous terrain. The conservation and the preservation of these species and the ecosystems that they represent is the highest priority and the most important objective of the Biosphere Reserve and everyone who lives in it.